Hi, today we're going to explore together how to create websites with Next.js and of course with React using Tailwind, TypeScript and more. Now, I firmly believe in learning by doing, and so we're going through a series of projects that will allow us to explore the different aspects of creating a website, a full stack website using Next.js. We'll be covering stuff like authentication, interacting with databases, creating a blog, a portfolio, and using React for interactivity. To be able to follow along, you'll need to understand the basics of JavaScript, of HTML and CSS, stuff like what is a div, what is a function or variable in JavaScript. However, you don't need to know any React or TypeScript or Tailwind. We'll cover that as we go along. In this video, we'll be going over 4 points, and this is just going to be the initial video, the setup, and we'll have more videos coming up later. First, we'll look at the basic prerequisites that you need to get started, the software, the tools that you need to have installed. Second, we'll install the Next.js software on our computer and set it up with Tailwind and with TypeScript. Thirdly, we'll look at the way Next.js is structured, what the different folders are for, which files go where. And finally, we'll take a look at how the routing works in Next.js. We'll create a few simple basic pages to illustrate how routing works. So let's get right in. And first, what do we need to get started? Now, before we even get started, there are two tools that we need to install if you don't already have them. The first tool you need is Node.js. Node.js is basically the JavaScript engine from the Chrome browser that's been packaged into a standalone server. You can install it using the Node.js website, and the exact method of installing it is going to depend on the operating system that you use. Now, to check whether you already have it installed, you just need to open a terminal and type node-v. If the console responds with a number, you're good to go. If the number is below 14, you might need to go ahead and install an updated version. While you're in the console, you can also check that the Node Package Manager, or NPM, is also installed by typing npm-v. Now, this is usually installed by Node, so if npm is missing, you want to go ahead and install Node again. The other tool you need is a text editor. I recommend using Visual Studio Code, which is free. It provides a lot of useful extensions. The Stack Overflow survey of 2022 states that it's used by about 75% of respondents. Now, one of Visual Studio Code's main strengths is its extensibility. Visual Studio Code doesn't come with built-in support for Tailwind, but there is an official extension by Tailwind Labs that provides IntelliSense, or that's completion and stuff, for Tailwind CSS. So let's go ahead and install that if you don't have it yet. You might also like to install the ESLint extension, as we'll be using that too. Now, we'll be adding other extensions as we go along down the line. Now, let's start installing Next.js. We first need to open a console, and we're going to type npx, then create next app at latest. Then we type in the project name, and I've called mine Code Apps Full Stack, and then --TypeScript --ESLint. Now, let's start that and get that going, and that's going to install Next.js. Now, once it's done, we can step into the folder using cd, which means change directory, and add the folder name. So in my case, it's cd Code Apps Full Stack. Now, the first thing we want to do once we're in here is to install Tailwind CSS, and to do that, we're going to type npm, then install -d because it's a dev dependency, and Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. And that's going to install all the node modules that Tailwind needs. And once that's run its course, we want to initialize Tailwind inside the folder. And to do that, we'll type npx and then Tailwind CSS init -p. And this will create a configuration file for post-CSS and another one for Tailwind at the root of our folders. Before we go and edit those, we do have two more modules to install. We'll start the installation, and while it's running, I'll explain what these modules are for. So let's type npm install, then @Tailwind CSS /typography and space daisy UI, and then -d. Now, Tailwind typography provides a set of sane defaults for how text is displayed, in particular for blog posts. It will basically show bigger headers, and then secondary headers are smaller and stuff like that. And so it structures our text. The second module we'll be installing is Daisy UI, and this provides basic UI components for Tailwind CSS, and it also sets up a theme system. Now that all this is installed, we need to finish configuring Tailwind. To do that, we'll start by typing code dot in the terminal in order to start Visual Studio Code within this folder. Once Studio Code is open, we can open and edit tailwind config.js, and we'll be making two changes in here. The first is in the content section. Here we want to specify the path to our code to allow Tailwind to purge unused styles. So here we go. We tell it to go into the src folder and then to look in all the subfolders. That's what the 2 stars are for. And then check every single file that has an extension that's either JS, TS, JSX or TSX. Now the second thing we want to edit is the plugin section. Here we want to tell it first to require at Tailwind CSS / typography, and the second we want to add is to require Daisy UI. Daisy UI depends on typography, so typography comes first. Now the next thing we need to do is to head to the src styles globals.css file, and here we want to remove everything and then add in at Tailwind base, at Tailwind components, and at Tailwind utilities. And that is our setup done. Now let's get acquainted with Next.js. At the moment we've been editing the file here in src styles. As you can see, there's also a public folder. Now this is where any publicly served files live. For the most part, this will be for image files and other similar static assets. The src folder also has a pages folder, and this is where Next.js will go to match a given URL to a component. So for example, the root of the URL, the homepage, will be served by the index file, which is the root of the pages folder. Before we open that up, we can see there are 2 other files, _app.tsx and _document.tsx. Now there isn't much to say about the app.tsx for now, but if we open the _document.tsx, you can see it's actually providing a kind of a common layout for our pages. We'll get into that a bit later. First, let's head over to index.tsx and let's clean up basically everything in there except for the main section. Now let's write h1 and say hello world. Now let's open up a terminal within VS Code, and then we can write npm run dev, and this will get the server started. It will tell us to open localhost 3000. If we open that up, we can see the page that we just edited. Now let's talk a bit about routing. Routing is how Next.js knows which component to render for which URL. Let's create a folder called blog in pages, and let's create a file in there called index.tsx, and in here we'll be creating a simple component, and we'll just type const blog index. We'll define this as a next page, and next provides the types, and it will just be a function that returns an h1 that says blog index. Finally, we need to add an export default blog index because Next.js uses the default export from a file to know which component to render. Now, if we head to localhost 3000 and then we go /blog, we can see our blog index. Now let's create a new file next to the index and call it article1, and it's basically going to be a copy of the index, but it's going to state article1 instead. Now if we head to the address called /blog/article1, we can see our content being shown, and this gives you an idea of how Next.js manages routing. There's a way to use parameters to have a slug parameter within root, and we'll see about that later. First, while we're going through the folders here, we can see there's an API folder that contains a TypeScript file, and this is a basic server-side API. We'll also look into that more into details in a later video. While we're here, next to the pages, let's create a components folder, and in this folder, let's create a header.tsx file. And this file, we're simply going to write export const header, and we define it as a React FC, and then we have it simply return a div that says header for now. Now let's head over to the document file that lives next to the index, and before the main component, let's add in the header component we've just created, and Visual Studio Code will kindly import it directly. And now let's have another look at our different pages. As you can see, the header now appears on all of them, on the index page and on the blog index page. Now another little thing, let's head back to our index page, and I'm going to type in I'm going to add some Tailwind classes to my title. Let's type in class name with text 5XL and font bold. Now there are several things to point out here. The first is that we're using class names, not class, that you might be more used to if you're more used to HTML, because class is a reserved keyword, and we're actually programming JavaScript here, so we can't use class directly in the code. It's a reserved keyword. The second thing to point out is that the page has refreshed automatically, and that's what's really nice about Next.js. It provides a really smooth developer experience. And the final thing here is, so these are Tailwind classes. If you head over to the Tailwind CSS website, you can find loads more classes to discover and work out how that works. But the way Tailwind works is that it provides utility classes, atomic utility classes, and it prunes unused classes. So, for example, let's inspect the HTML here, and let's change the class to text3xl. Now, text3xl does exist in Tailwind, but here there's no style that's applied because Tailwind hasn't generated the text3xl class because it wasn't created in the code. Now, if we head over to the code itself and we change to text3xl, we can see that is refreshed and it will show the style. So Tailwind basically prunes the CSS to remove classes that aren't used, and this ends up making a much smoother, faster loading page because there is no excess unused CSS that's included. Right, so I'm going to stop here because it's going to be a good starting point for all our different projects. The next thing that we'll be doing is setting up a simple landing page with a header and a hero section and a features section with 3 cards, 3 columns. And for that, we'll be using the Daisy UI components and theming it. And we'll be looking at how to toggle between light and dark mode and to be able to switch between themes on our portfolio, well, our landing page website. That's in the next video, and you'll find that here as soon as it is up. I'll see you there.